In the vast emptiness of space, the line between heroism and loneliness often blurs. 5 years ago, I never imagined that answering a mysterious distress signal would change my life forever. I was just another deep space salvage operator, making ends meet by collecting space debris and abandoned ship parts in the outer rim of the Andromeda sector. That fateful day started like any other. My scanner picked up an unusual energy signature, different from the typical space junk I usually encountered. As I guided my ship closer, the gentle hum of my engines was the only sound accompanying me through the darkness. The source turned out to be a small escape pod, its silver hull reflecting the distant starlight. Its design was unlike anything I'd seen in my 15 years of salvage work. I remember my heart racing as I initiated the docking sequence. The pod's exterior showed signs of weapons damage, and its life support systems were failing. Through the frost-covered viewport, I caught a glimpse of movement inside. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be just another routine salvage job. Using my emergency override codes, I managed to crack open the pod's hatch. The rush of cold air carried with it the scent of something sweet, like honeysuckle mixed with morning dew. There, curled up in the pilot's seat, was a being that would rewrite everything I thought I knew about the universe. She appeared almost human, except for the subtle shimmer of her silvery skin and the delicate, luminescent markings that traced patterns along her arms. She was barely conscious, her breathing shallow. I couldn't understand the words she whispered, but the universal language of fear and gratitude in her eyes needed no translation. As I carried her to my ship's medical bay, I couldn't help but notice how light she felt, almost as if gravity had less of a hold on her. The next few days were a blur of medical treatments and attempts at communication. Slowly, through a combination of gestures and my ship's basic translation software, I learned that her name translated roughly to something like Starlight Whisper in English. She was a refugee, fleeing from something she couldn't or wouldn't fully explain. What started as a rescue mission soon evolved into something neither of us expected. She taught me about her culture's advanced understanding of quantum mechanics, while I introduced her to simple human pleasures like coffee and classic Earth movies. Even with all our differences, there was something undeniably familiar in the way she laughed at my terrible space jokes. But our peaceful days were numbered. Strange ships began appearing at the edge of my scanner's range, following patterns that were too precise to be random. Whatever she was running from hadn't given up the chase. Each time we'd detect them, she would grow quiet, her luminescent markings dimming with what I came to recognize as dread. I knew I had a choice to make. The smart thing would have been to drop her off at the nearest space station and continue with my simple life of salvage operations. That's what any reasonable person would have done. But as I watched her sleeping peacefully in the co-pilot's seat one artificial night cycle, her markings pulsing softly in sync with her breathing, I realized something that would change both our destinies forever. Sometimes the greatest adventures in life come disguised as simple choices, and sometimes love finds you in the most unexpected corners of the galaxy. This is our story, a tale of how saving someone's life led to saving my own, and how the heart knows no boundaries, not even those of different solar systems. But first, let me tell you about the day everything changed, when those mysterious ships finally caught up with us. The proximity alarm jolted me awake at 300 hours, ship time. 3 vessels had dropped out of hyperspace less than 50,000 kilometers from our position, close enough to make my palms sweat. Their design matched nothing in my ship's database, but the way Starlight's markings flashed with intense blue pulses told me everything I needed to know. These were her pursuers. I killed all non-essential systems and powered down to minimal life support, an old trick I'd learned during my military service days. We drifted silently in the shadow of a massive asteroid, watching as the unknown ships swept the sector with scanning beams. Starlight sat beside me in the cockpit, her hand gripping mine so tightly it almost hurt. The fear in her eyes made my decision easier than it should have been. "They're the shadows," she whispered, using our newly developed common language. "My people's oldest enemy." Her voice trembled as she explained how the shadows had been systematically hunting down her species for generations, seeking to steal their advanced technology and unique biological abilities. Her people's natural capacity to manipulate quantum fields made them valuable targets. The pieces started falling into place. The strange equipment in her escape pod, the advanced healing rate I'd observed during her recovery, and the way small objects sometimes floated around her when she slept. It all made sense now. She wasn't just a refugee. She was carrying vital secrets that could change the balance of power in this sector of space. As the hostile ships drew closer, Starlight revealed more about herself. She wasn't just any member of her species. She was part of their scientific elite, working on a revolutionary form of faster-than-light travel. The Shadows wanted her research, believing it could give them the power to dominate multiple galaxies. But she had refused to let such dangerous knowledge fall into their hands. The next few hours were the longest of my life. We watched as the shadow ships methodically searched every asteroid and debris field in our vicinity. My old salvage ship's systems were basic, but they had one advantage. They were too primitive to trigger most advanced scanning systems. Sometimes the best hiding spot is right in plain sight. But we couldn't hide forever. Our oxygen recyclers were working at minimum capacity, and the cold of space was slowly seeping through our powered-down hull. I could see frost forming on the interior walls, and Starlight's natural bioluminescence was growing dimmer by the hour. We needed a plan. That's when I remembered something from my early days as a salvage operator. An old mining outpost, abandoned after the crystalline rush ended 20 years ago. It was just a few light years away, hidden in a dense asteroid field that played havoc with most modern sensors. If we could reach it, we might find enough supplies to last us until the search moved on. The risk was enormous. To get there, we'd have to power up our engines and make a run for it, exposed and vulnerable. The Shadows would detect us instantly, but staying here meant certain capture, or worse. I looked at Starlight, seeing in her eyes the same determination I felt in my heart. "Do you trust me?" I asked her softly. Her markings shifted to a warm golden color I'd never seen before. "With my life," she replied, and I knew she meant it. As I began the engine warm-up sequence, my hands steady despite the danger, I realized something important. This wasn't just about saving her anymore. Somewhere between that first rescue and now, this had become our story, our fight, and I was ready to risk everything to see it through. Little did I know, the next few minutes would test that commitment in ways I never imagined possible. I fired up the engines, and for one terrifying moment, nothing happened. The cold had seized up the old machinery worse than I'd feared. Starlight's markings pulsed rapidly as she placed her hands on the ship's console. Suddenly, I felt a surge of energy flow through the systems. She was somehow interfacing with my ship's quantum core, giving it the boost it needed. The engines roared to life, and we shot out from behind the asteroid like a bullet. Almost immediately, the shadow ships detected us. Their massive forms turned with surprising grace, and the chase began. My old salvage ship might not have been pretty, but I'd modified her engines myself over the years. We had a chance, slim as it was. Red warning lights flooded the cockpit as the first energy blast passed dangerously close to our stern. The ship shuddered, and I could hear the hull groaning under the stress of my evasive maneuvers. Starlight worked frantically beside me, her fingers dancing across the control panel as she diverted power between our shields and engines. "We can't outrun them forever," I shouted over the blaring alarms. "We need to make it to the asteroid field." The mining outpost was our only hope, but the path there was treacherous. The dense field of spinning rocks and ice had claimed many ships over the years, their wreckage adding to the deadly obstacle course. Another blast rocked the ship, this time grazing our port side. Emergency lights flickered, and I smelled the distinct odor of burning circuitry. We were still 20 minutes from the asteroid field, and our pursuers were closing in. Starlight's markings had shifted to a deep purple I'd never seen before, and she seemed to be in some kind of trance. "Whatever you're planning," I said, wrestling with the controls, "now would be a good time." She nodded without opening her eyes, her concentration absolute. The air around us began to shimmer with an otherworldly light, and I felt a strange tingling sensation throughout my body. That's when I saw it on our rear scanner. A massive shadow vessel, easily 10 times our size, emerging from hyperspace directly in our path. We were trapped between the pursuing ships and this new threat. The massive ship's weapon ports began to glow with an ominous green light. "Hold on to something," Starlight suddenly screamed. Her markings blazed like miniature suns, and the shimmering air around us intensified. I felt a sensation like reality itself was being stretched thin, like a rubber band about to snap. The massive shadow ship fired its main weapon, a lance of green energy cutting through space toward us. Time seemed to slow down. I could see the energy beam approaching, could feel the heat of it even through our failing shields. Starlight was glowing so brightly now that I could barely look at her, and strange symbols appeared in the air around us, spinning and shifting in impossible ways. The ship's systems were going haywire, every alarm screaming at once. Whatever Starlight was doing, it was affecting everything around us. Through the chaos, I reached out and grabbed her hand, not knowing if these would be our final moments together. The green energy beam was meters away from our ship when Starlight opened her eyes. They were pure white now, filled with the same strange light that surrounded us. She looked at me one last time and whispered something in her native language that I couldn't understand. That reality itself seemed to tear apart around us. The last thing I saw was the shadow ships distorting, stretching like images in a funhouse mirror, as our world exploded into a kaleidoscope of impossible colors and sensations. We were falling, flying, being torn apart and put back together all at once. I thought I knew what it meant to be afraid of the unknown, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. When my vision finally cleared, we were somewhere else entirely. The asteroid field we'd been aiming for was gone, replaced by an endless sea of swirling purple clouds. Our ship floated in what looked like the eye of a cosmic storm. The shadow vessels were nowhere to be seen, but that wasn't what made my blood run cold. Starlight lay unconscious at her station, her usually luminescent skin now pale and dim. But before I could reach her, a new voice filled the cockpit, not through our comm systems, but directly in my mind. It spoke in a language I'd never heard before, yet somehow I understood every word. "You've brought her home," the voice said, carrying both warmth and ancient power. Though not in the way any of us expected. The purple clouds parted, revealing something that defied explanation. A vast city floating in space, its crystalline towers stretching for miles in every direction. Ships of organic design moved between the structures, their hulls pulsing with the same bioluminescence as Starlight's markings. As I stared in awe, Starlight stirred beside me. Her eyes widened at the sight, and tears began streaming down her face. "The hidden sanctuary," she whispered. I never thought I'd see it again, but there was fear mixed with her joy, something that made me instantly uneasy. The voice in my head explained what Starlight couldn't. This wasn't just her home. It was the last refuge of her people, hidden in a pocket dimension between realities. No outsider had ever found it, let alone been allowed inside. Until now. My presence here violated their most sacred laws, laws written in the aftermath of a devastating war that had nearly wiped out their civilization. "The Council will not be pleased," Starlight said, her strength slowly returning. "A human in the sanctuary. This hasn't happened since the Great Betrayal." She wouldn't meet my eyes as she spoke those words, and my stomach knotted with dread. There was something she hadn't told me, something huge. Before I could ask, our ship was caught in a tractor beam of pure energy. As we were guided toward one of the crystal towers, more voices joined the first in my head, arguing in that strange language. I caught fragments about prophecies and cycles repeating, about the choice and the price of trust. Starlight's markings had shifted to a color I'd never seen before, a deep, swirling mixture of gold and black. She finally looked at me, her eyes filled with ancient knowledge and fresh pain. "There's something you need to know," she began, her voice trembling, "about why the shadows were really chasing me, about who you really are." But before she could finish, a blinding light filled the cockpit. The arguing voices in my head fell silent, replaced by a single, powerful presence that made my entire being vibrate with its intensity. Through the light, I saw Starlight bow her head in recognition. "The Oracle awakens," she whispered, "after 10,000 years of silence. It awakens for you." The light grew brighter, and with it came a revelation that shook me to my core. In that moment, I began to understand that saving Starlight hadn't been an accident. None of it had been. The truth was far more terrifying and wonderful than anything I could have imagined. The Oracle's light filled every corner of my mind, and suddenly I was experiencing memories that weren't my own. I saw the ancient war between Starlight's people and humanity, not the shadows, but us. Humans had once known about this realm, had even been allies with these dimensional travelers, until fear and greed tore everything apart. The shadows weren't their enemies. They were guardians, created by Starlight's people to protect the secret of their existence from humanity. The truth hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just some random salvage operator who'd stumbled across an escape pod. I was a descendant of the few humans who had remained loyal during the Great Betrayal, my bloodline carefully preserved through generations of guardians. The strange dreams I'd had all my life, my inexplicable talent for quantum mechanics despite no formal training, it all made sense now. "You were never meant to find me so soon," Starlight said softly, her markings now pulsing in sync with the Oracle's light. "But the shadows detected a temporal anomaly. Someone has been manipulating time itself, trying to prevent what's coming." Her voice broke as she continued. "They weren't chasing me. They were trying to protect me from those who want to stop us from completing what our ancestors began." The Oracle's presence surged, and I saw it then. A glimpse of a future where dimensions merged, where humanity and Starlight's people worked together once again. But I also saw the cost of such unity, the sacrifice it would require. The choice, the Oracle revealed, had always been mine to make. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the Crystal City. The purple clouds surrounding the sanctuary began to tear apart, revealing multiple temporal rifts. Through them came ships I recognized, human ships, but not from my time. They were led by someone who shared my exact genetic signature. A future version of myself, twisted by bitterness and fear, determined to prevent a union they believed would lead to humanity's subjugation. Starlight's hand found mine as reality buckled around us. "The time loop," she whispered. "This is how it always begins." The Oracle's light intensified, and I understood what I had to do. The future version of me had it wrong. The sacrifice wasn't about subjugation, but transformation. A willing fusion of two species to create something entirely new, something that could exist in all dimensions at once. My ship's quantum core began to pulse in harmony with Starlight's bioluminescence. The Oracle's power flowed through us both, and I made my choice, not out of duty to some ancient bloodline or prophecy, but because of the love that had grown between us, a love that transcended dimensions. As the temporal rifts threatened to tear apart the sanctuary, Starlight and I became the bridge between worlds. Our consciousness expanded, touching every human and dimensional being in range. Through our connection, they felt what we felt, understood what we understood. The future version of myself faltered as our shared memories washed over him, finally understanding the truth he'd forgotten. The shadows appeared then, not as enemies but as witnesses to the fulfillment of their ancient purpose. The temporal rifts began to seal as past, present, and future aligned. Starlight and I became something new, something that existed both as individuals and as a unified consciousness bridging dimensions. The last thing I saw as my old self was the Oracle's light spreading throughout the cosmos, carrying with it the message that had been hidden in my genes for generations. Love, not power, was always meant to be the force that united dimensions. And as our consciousness touched the minds of billions across space and time, I heard my future self whisper, "So this is how it truly ends and begins." The cycle was broken, but our story, it was just beginning. But that's a tale for another time. A year has passed since that day in the sanctuary, though time flows differently now that the dimensions have begun their gradual convergence. I still look human, and Starlight still glows with her beautiful bioluminescence, but we're something more now, living bridges between worlds. Our transformation has become a symbol of hope for both species, proof that fear of the unknown can be overcome by understanding and love. The Crystal City is no longer hidden. It now serves as an embassy between dimensions, floating in a pocket of space-time visible from Earth on clear nights as a purple nebula. Humans call it the Twilight Gateway, and its existence has changed our civilization in ways we're only beginning to understand. The shadow ships still patrol the borders between dimensions, but now they do so openly, protecting the delicate balance we've created. My old salvage ship sits in a museum now, surrounded by wide-eyed children from both species who listen to holographic recreations of our story. Sometimes, when I walk past it, I can still feel the phantom sensation of those controls under my hands, still smell the burning circuits from our desperate escape. It reminds me how the biggest changes in the universe can start with the smallest acts of kindness. The future version of myself didn't disappear after our transformation. Instead, he became part of the temporal council, working to preserve the timeline that led to our unity while helping others avoid the mistakes he made. His presence serves as a constant reminder that every choice we make sends ripples through time and space. Starlight and I spend most of our time teaching others how to bridge the gap between dimensions. It turns out there are more humans with the ancient bloodline than anyone suspected, and more of her people willing to help guide them. Each successful joining brings our worlds closer together, healing the scars left by the great betrayal one connection at a time. The Oracle's presence remains with us, not as an overwhelming force, but as a gentle guide. Through it, we've learned that our story was just one of many playing out across the multiverse, all of them working toward the same goal of unity through different paths. Some nights, when the dimensional barriers are thinnest, we can feel these other stories brushing against our consciousness like whispers from parallel worlds. Perhaps the most surprising change has been the simplest one, the way people from both species now look at the stars. Where once they saw only darkness filled with potential threats, they now see doorways to new understanding. The fear that once drove humanity to betray their dimensional allies has been replaced by curiosity and hope. Our transformation didn't solve all problems or heal all wounds. There are still those who resist the change, who cling to separation and suspicion. But every day, more people choose to embrace the possibility of something greater than themselves. They look at what Starlight and I have become and see not an ending, but a beginning. As I stand here now, watching the sunset paint the crystal towers in shades of gold and purple, I feel Starlight's consciousness intertwined with mine. Through our shared perception, I can see the quantum threads that connect all living things, the delicate dance of possibilities that makes up reality itself. And I understand that love isn't just an emotion. It's a force as real as gravity, capable of binding not just hearts, but entire dimensions together. Our story started with a distress signal in the depths of space, but it never really ended. It lives on in every new connection made, every barrier broken, every moment of understanding between species that once saw each other as enemies. Because in the end, the greatest journeys aren't about the distance we travel, but the bridges we build along the way. And somewhere out there, in the infinite expanse of space and time, another story is just beginning.